We're based at the University of Leeds and we're running an AHRC-funded project called Electrifying Women, Understanding the Long History of Women in Engineering. So before we get on to the Electrical Association for Women, I just thought quickly introduce the project. So it's an outreach and engagement project where we're trying to kind of spread the history of women in engineering. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there's a bit of a problem current day that only 12% of practicing engineers are currently women. So we're sort of hoping by actually sharing this long history of women in engineering, we might kind of help boost these numbers, or at least kind of give women and girls a bit of a legacy that they could hold on to if they were thinking about becoming engineers. So one of our other project colleagues is the Curator of Engineering and Technology at the Science Museum, Liz Bruton. She couldn't be here today, but that's kind of the team that is Electrifying Women. So we're kind of working in conjunction with the Women's Engineering Society. This body celebrated its centenary last year, so in fact it's been going for 100 years, which is actually quite a remarkable achievement. A lot of these kinds of organisations do not last 100 years. But sadly, a lot of engineers, a lot of us just in the general public actually haven't heard of the Women's Engineering Society and have no idea that it's been going for 100 years. So we've kind of been working with them to highlight the story of its existence and some of its amazing members, but also looking backwards to the Victorian era to think about other engineers. And even going way back, you obviously have Sarah Guppy is a Bristol engineer from the 18th century who kind of did amazing things. And again, is sort of only recently being sort of remembered for her contribution to engineering. So the Women's Engineering Society, as I say, it was founded 101 years ago in June this year by 7 women, including Lady Catherine Parsons, who was the wife of Sir Charles Parsons, famously credited with inventing the steam, is it turbine? Turbine. And they had the aim, basically, after World War I, to promote the place of women in engineering, especially after women had worked in the factories during World War I, but as this was threatened when men were returning from the front and actually laws were put in place which meant women had to give up these jobs. And actually, amazingly, the Woman Engineer, which was their journal, is fully digitized, and a lot of this history is contained within it, and that's available via the Institution of Engineering and Technology archives if you did fancy kind of looking up some stories in there. So this does link to the Electrical Association for Women, because actually it was an offshoot of the Women's Engineering Society. So 5 years later, in 1924, a group of women who were involved in WES decided that actually there needed to be maybe kind of I suppose we might call it an outreach program, something that was involved in educating women about the electrical products that were flooding the home in the interwar period, but obviously would become much more prevalent in the post-war period. So it's their first president was Lady Nancy Astor, who was the first woman to sit as an MP. And she was a bit amused, this idea that actually electricity was going to emancipate women, because she said, well, I think men are actually the problem. So that was Nancy Astor's take. But actually it leads to things like these homes for lady bachelorettes. So there was this kind of idea that working women did exist, they weren't necessarily married, and that they needed flats for them. So the EAW actually designed homes for these kind of single working women, which links into the Bristol house, which Graham's going to talk about in a second. And actually, they did actually have diplomas for something called electrical housecraft, which kind of sounds a bit like wizardry, I think, but wasn't. And a lot of this was reported in the Woman Engineer that I just mentioned. So Bristol actually has a big connection to the EAW, because this is where the all-electric house was created and built. So this was in 1935, and you can see here an example of how it was advertised. And it's quite interesting that it's sort of positioning itself as the dream house, which was sort of part of a wider narrative, this idea that technology was going to emancipate women and it was going to create these amazing streamlined modernist houses. It's interesting because there was actually all gas houses being produced at the same time, and we see this kind of rivalry between gas and electricity developing at this time. And in fact, one of the all gas houses is Kensal House, which is in Ladbroke Grove in London, is still inhabited today. Where are time so? Oh yes, and now I will pass on to Graham. Perfect.
Thank you, Emily. Well, let me just go back. Anyway, it's nice to be back in Bristol, one of my favourite cities. I've come in many times. First time I've been allowed to talk like this, though. So thanks, Emily, for the introduction. How many of you actually have ever come across this all-electric house in Bristol? I thought it was world famous in Bristol, to borrow a line from Billy Connolly. It is something of a fascination. There are two of them. One thing to say about it, following what Emily said, actually, is it's designed to show that you can have a fully joined-up approach to electric power in a home that actually is elegant, sophisticated, and modern. It might look a bit surprising now, but many people in post-World War I Britain would have had coal, and gas and paraffin have been messy. This is a way of showing the future is clean, tidy, pure, and electricity is the way to go, particularly if it turns out that you are one of the women still at home wanting to have some chance of getting out of the house and getting a job as well as doing housework. Okay. But the other question, of course, is not just why have this, and this has become our future. This wasn't self-evident at all in the 1930s. There are so many other ways of having houses. This was expensive and difficult to achieve. It took sponsorship from the Bristol branch of the Electrical Association for Women, the EAW, which was very well organised. They were famous for having a very strong interest in architecture. I mean, Bristol, you may know, maybe, has had a tradition of innovative housing. Before this, there were several really quite radical houses designed by artists and working together with architects. And what the Bristol group of women in the EAW did was to actually say to architects and house builders, you actually need to talk to us to build the kind of houses that women want. This was quite a radical idea, women being asked what they wanted. And actually, they were very effective at organising this. What they did was to get an architect, Adrian Powell, and entirely Bristol-based designers, fitters, and electricians to produce this marvel. I mean, let me just go, well, I'll go forward slightly. You can see here, this was what we had in the opening slide, very modernist, flat-roof house. This is what it looks like in plan form. And it is designed to be very elegant, very simple, easy to clean, beautiful, and very functional all at the same time, which older houses built for coal were definitely not. You may have encountered coal-fired houses in the past and wondered how much time they took to clean. Okay. Well, this illustrates how to make everything labour-saving. But what is remarkable is actually how much electrical gadgetry there is in this house. If you bear in mind that many older houses would have had a single fireplace per room, if you were lucky, this has six inset fires and 3 directional fires. That's 9 heaters in the house. 3 electric clocks. Okay. A towel rail heated, not all of us have those these days, in fact, and a fridge and an electric fan. This was about as far as it would go. Interestingly, they didn't presume you had an electric oven. There's a good reason for that. I mean, how many of you actually still now use gas ovens? Many of you do, yeah? That's because gas ovens for many people are more efficient, they're easy to work with, possibly even safer, but produce, some would say, better food. Many chefs use that. This was not part of the all-electric house. It was not so all-electric after all, it might be said. But the point being, that actually made it more expensive too. The overall plan was to make this affordable for ordinary folk. But the £30 a year costs is something like £1,500 now, which is more than the average we would spend each year, of course, on electricity. But to give you a view about what it looks like on the inside, you can see here it's been designed almost entirely to be white. Partly, I think, to raise the expectation of things being kept very clean. Because with electric lighting, the dirt showed much, much more than with gas lighting, it must be said. Okay. And you can observe there are the fittings, lots of little corners filled with gadgets, water heaters and so forth, but all joined up, integrated thinking so that an architect can work with the builder very quickly to install this. Up to this point, all electrical lighting and other fittings have been installed post hoc, much less tidily, much less efficiently, much more inclined to go wrong. But it should be said that much of the time, this was too expensive. I mean, there was one very quick sale of this house. It's been restored. You can see it actually in North Bristol now. But many people did find actually that it was just a little bit more than they could really actually cope with. So what was actually also introduced by this association concurrently, as we heard from Emily, is the idea of electrical housecraft. Now, we all take it for granted that we know how to handle gadgets around the house. I read a book 10 years ago, which I won't mention, but it's on Amazon, you can buy it if you like, which basically showed how much there was a panic about electrical lighting, how much there was a fear of the unknown nature of electricity. What was it? It was intangible, difficult to see, difficult to weigh. You only knew about it when you were being shocked. So there was a practice of electrical housecraft showing people how to use gadgets safely in the home. And the Bristol team were obviously very skilled at this. They were experts at it. And this kind of housecraft school is what was embodied in this wonderful book, the Electrical Handbook for Women. I can pass this around in the break if you promise to give it back again. This is a beautiful image of women's hands turning the armature of a dynamo, making it perfectly plain. The industry of electric power would not function without women to be there to put in the demand and also to actually exercise some of the supply as well. And this book actually was produced in 9 editions over more than 50 years, which is quite astonishing. Not many books we write today can ever last through that many editions. And let me just show you. This is the final edition. 1983, it's changed completely. It's dropped all reference to being for women. It turns out that everybody is responsible for making sure that electric power and gadgetry works well in the home. And I remember reading this when I was actually a sixth former, actually, maybe do half a degree in physics afterwards too. And it actually kind of sadly kills off the EAW because there's no role anymore just for women. Women are not the ones to be handling this anymore. They don't need any special skill training. So the EAW dies off in 1986, having no more work to do. But it's left us with a rational understanding that everyone needs to be involved in knowing how electricity works in the home. And the book itself clearly embodies the way in which joined-up thinking between architects, electricians, builders, and engineers is vital for having a home worth living in. And that's it. These are our contact details. Do please stay in touch. Okay.